then we'll just dive right in.
Yeah, it's an interesting time in the podcasting space. Since the pandemic's been on, we've seen amazing growth across the space. But I'm weekly doing multiple calls with podcasters, and the thing that I keep hearing again and again and again and again is, how do I grow my show?
Yeah.
And it seems to be the universal question that's being asked. So part of the presentation today is really kind of focused on some simple steps to be able to do some things you're doing today that you can improve upon to help your show grow. And I didn't want to make this too complicated, because I could have come to you with a list of 30 things, but I think I came with you with 3 or 4. So we'll be able to have a short presentation on that and a discussion. But glad everyone's on. And of course, thanks for having me.
Well, Todd, we'll let you take it away, and I'll be available if you need me.
All right. Sounds good. So let's see. Okay, we did go full screen. All right. That's good. I can move over a little bit. So I'm not going to kill you folks too much with the screen share, but I am going to bring one up here for you to be able to see. And oh, that's interesting. It isn't mirrored. All right, how can I help that? The text we might have to do it just with me, because what I see on my screen looks backwards. So I want to talk to you really about really where you're building your brand. And this is something I've kind of been on a bandwagon for a really, really long time. And I'll get into some of the semantics of it here in a minute. But some of you are probably building your brand on your own website. Some of you may be building on Instagram, on Twitter or Facebook, or maybe you're building your brand on your podcast host website. So if you have some show name .yourhost.com or something like that, you would be considered building your brand on your podcast host website. And I know some of you do a combination of all these things. And where we are today, and I'll say it for the millionth time, and it's more important than ever, and as I'll make evident here in a minute, is you need your own website. You need your own .com. And that really is the crux of part of this discussion today, and how I'm going to help you grow your show organically. Google search right now is the #1 podcast discovery method. And word of mouth is obviously the second. There's lots of, I guess, as we would say, opportunities there. And this is where we're going to talk about growing your show organically and growing the show organically. And I really want you to focus on a number of things here. And if you're taking notes, and actually I can send you the slides later, because for some reason they're 90 degrees out. But if you want those, you can email me, Todd@blubrry.com, and I'll send you the actual slides of this. But are your episode titles descriptive? We work a lot on our show name titles. I know I do the Geek News Central podcast. I do the New Media Show. We do the Podcast Insider over at Blubrry. We were very specific in the program name of the show. But where you have an ability here to really make a big difference is in your episode titles. And your episode titles shouldn't be 30 different words long. They should be like 30 to 40 characters long, a minimum of 30 characters for an episode title. And when you're thinking about episode titles, you want to really think about Google. You do your podcast, you record your podcast for your audience. They subscribe or follow or play your show wherever they may catch the show at. And they're going to get your content in full breadth of what you're going to put forth. But when it comes to your website and your show, that title is extremely important. And hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate a little bit to this in a few minutes. But you want to think like someone Googling for something. You want to write a title as if you would search for your show. And more importantly, within your blog post, you want to reinforce your episode title in the first paragraph of your show notes. It's really, really important to say, if you say, I'm going to talk about Duck Dynasty or whatever you're going to be talking about, if you're doing an entertainment show, if you're going to be talking about, you need to reinforce that title in your show notes. And that is a big portion of being able to win the episode search game. And the reason why I know this is because for the past 16 plus years, I have really counted on Google and Bing and all the other Yahoo at the time to drive traffic to my episodes based upon the episode title. Sure, people happened to my website and they found the website via searching for the show name, or they happened there because there was a different blog article that wasn't a podcast, but people landed on those podcast episodes because of the episode title. And I take a lot of time on every podcast that I record to write the correct title and then back it up. And if you do this long enough, you get paid off in huge Google search traffic that comes back to your website. Now, it's a numbers game, because let's say you have 1,000 people come to your website from a certain search term. You may only get 10% or 5 or 1% that actually says, oh, this person has a podcast, let me check it out. And then probably a smaller percentage of those folks will ultimately subscribe. But over time, this is additive. For me, my number one way to get, because and then doing podcasts for so long, I'm on episode 1500 plus, is that people get sick and tired of listening to you or me, and they move on to a different show, but sometimes they'll come back. So you have to have new listeners coming in for those people that are leaving you on the other end. Now, if you're a Joe Rogan or someone like that, maybe they never leave. But I'm sure we've all abandoned a podcast because maybe we got tired of the content or it wasn't entertaining enough, and maybe we've came back. So you have to feed the beast by feeding the front end. And how do you get those people in? Well, you do all the things. You do all the social, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn participation, hanging out in those groups. That's stuff you do. But organically, what you're doing every time you publish your podcast is you're writing an episode title, you're writing show notes with hopefully links to the content that you're talking about. And another thing that can use to your advantage is something that's called backlinks. Backlinks are probably the most valuable thing that you can obtain from someone that's been on your show. And as an example, things that I do is if I've done an interview, I will keep the guest apprised of when that interview is coming out. I'll provide them as much metadata that I can. I'll let them preview the post. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to pump that host up to know that we want them to promote it. And if they will simply blog, tweet, put a Facebook link back to your episode of that podcast, you build backlink value, which Google sees and allows you to become more authoritative in the space. I started as a blogger, poor blogger. But over time, I built authority in the podcast because people were backlinking to me because I was linking to them and vice versa. And it causes this beautiful storm in Google that drives traffic to the website. So I would have between 20 and 200,000 hits a day come into my tech site. And a small portion of those people would check the show out, and another small portion would subscribe, but again, day after day after day. And there's other values, of course, of having your own website. You control the SEO. You control your brand, you control your IP. You can do this on WordPress, Squarespace. There's lots of places to build a website these days. But one thing that many of you may not realize is if you are on a podcast host's website, something.yourhostprovider.com or yourhostprovider.com/your show name, all it takes is 1, 2, or 3 shows that are not at all related to you, that are also on those platforms, to have linked to something maybe sexual, or linked to something that ended up being a page that there would end up being a honeypot for spammers, or whatever it may be. And all of a sudden, your show ranking in the search engine goes down, no fault of your own, but because of what someone else has published within that domain. that you're sitting on with 1,000 other shows, you're not going to get the same value or long-term show building value of being able to control your ecosystem completely on your own.com. And some people will argue with me that there's no effect. Well, I prove it day in, day out by just doing searches for episodes. And this is one of the things that you can do. And maybe you haven't been negatively impacted yet if you're not on your own website. But at some point, something will happen. You'll say, where did I go? Where did I go? Your show might be able to be found, but is the episode able to be found? Now, again, Google is the #1 discovery method of podcasts right now. And it wasn't this way more than a year ago. But with the Edison research and everything that's come out, it is. This is where people go today to find a new podcast or search for a topic that you may have covered. They find your episode, they listen to it, they become a fan, they subscribe. Again, it's just one way organically to help yourself. And I'll say it again. You record your podcast for your audience. You write your show notes. You may have a podcast search problem, and maybe you don't. But again and again and again and again, when I do calls with podcasters, I look at titles that are horrible for their episodes. Now, a show like mine, where I do a tech show and I'm talking about 25 different topics, I'll pick one. I'll pick one that I think I can win the search battle on. I'll pick a topic from that list of articles I talked about. And I'll demonstrate here in a second what has really happened in using this strategy. So I'm going to bring, actually, hopefully the page will update in a second. Okay, how come it hasn't? There it goes. So what you see is, and maybe you can't see it real well, but the search term, the episode was called Google Incognito Lawsuit to Advance. And that was published on the 15th of March, just 2 days ago. And in the search results, Google Incognito Lawsuit to Advance, I am #3. And who are the two above me? Well, there's an ad. There's The Verge. There's Ars Technica. And my site, geeknewscentral.com. I'm #3 in the search results. So in the tech world, The Verge and Ars Technica are very, very big players. I consider this a major win that I'm #3 in the search term for that particular episode. Now, I don't always win, but sometimes I win even bigger. Here's one. Verizon says turn off 5G to save battery. When I Googled Verizon says turn off 5G to save battery, guess what I was? I was up in the summary section. I'm right below the first ad. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Now, how many people are going to exactly search Verizon says turn off 5G to save battery? Enough do that it makes a difference. And again, it's a search term. It's a title that really allows me to come up high in the search results. Now, if you search Verizon says turn off 5G, I don't win that. I'm not in the first page. But it's a little extra metadata that I put in there is just enough over time to gain my site an incredible amount of traffic. Sometimes I don't win at all. Sometimes I'm on the second page. Because even as long as I've been doing this, I don't win it. And what we see is on podcasters' websites too, is sometimes they just shoot themselves completely in the foot. And some have a website problem. That's a whole different situation. They come to a website often or not, and I can't even subscribe to the show. The podcast is buried on page 5. There's no way to contact the podcaster. And there's just basic stuff. If you're doing a podcast and you want your podcast to grow, it better be right on the front of your page, right on the front of your website, up front, center, and person, and give them no excuse to not be able to subscribe to the show. You'd be shocked how many times I go to or now follow, because that's the new word that's coming from Apple Podcasts. You would be shocked the number of times I go to a podcaster's website just during a consult, and guess what? You can't even find to subscribe to the show, and sometimes there's not even a player on the page. Granted, only 5 or 6 or 7% of normal podcast consumption is done on the website. But my goal is get them to the website through search, see that there's content there, and then say, oh, this guy or gal has a podcast. Let me subscribe to this show or check it out. That's the goal. That's just a little bit of the engineering to try to get people to follow the podcast. Now, again, I'm not discounting Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all this other stuff you have to do. This is just one thing, again, to hyper focus for your website to be able to build traffic and to be able to build authority, Google authority, and to be able to really get to the point where people will say, search a search term in your genre of topic, and you come up as a number 1, number 2 search result. They click on that on their mobile phone. And that's another thing. Is your site mobile ready? Because Google considers mobile number 1. And a good example of that, and I'm waiting for my screen to update, is check your website on your mobile phone. Make sure that your site's mobile ready. If it's not, you're going to get impacted negatively by Google just because the site's not mobile first. Google considers mobile the most important thing right now. So it's not even your browser on your desktop. It's what they see on the mobile device. Now, I talked a little bit about backlinks, but backlinks are really, really critical. Do everything in your possible existence to get people that you talk about or talk to or interview to backlink to your site or to that episode, more importantly. And I use a little strategy that's really kind of, I call it making their head blow up a little bit. You want to pump the ego. I talk to a lot of CEOs and CFOs and big shots in companies. And oftentimes I'll say, hey, the interview's done. It's almost ready. This is going to be fantastic. You're going to love it. Make sure you share it with your PR people. Make sure you get it on the website. Because when you start getting links back from companies like Intel or GoPro or whatever genre you're in, you build authority for your website that causes you to get higher in those search results, because Google said that company that it has authority or that person has backlinked to this podcast, and that means that they believe in it, and that raises one of the 700 measurements that Google uses to give you a good result for that particular article. So backlinks are really, really big. Now, Todd, I can't build backlinks. The guy that I interviewed or the gal I interviewed doesn't want to backlink to the website. Well, number 1, that's a problem. But number 2, then take it upon yourself to network with other podcasters that you trust and you love and that are in your topic zone. Do link exchanges, but don't make it spammy. Put in your blog post, hey, by the way, I love this particular podcast, and link to that podcast or that episode, and try to get that person to do that in return, and you will build backlinks from podcasters. This is where networks have this huge advantage. Networks always are cross-promoting and talking about each other, and that is the beauty of being part of a network. So if you're not part of a network, though, you can just reach out to say, hey, I love your podcast. I'm going to talk about you in my next episode. I'm going to link to you. If you like my podcast, I'd love to have you link back. Don't ask for a link before you give a link, and make it sincere and make sure that website has got stuff on there that you think is awesome. And you can build backlink authority that way as well. Another thing you have to watch out for is fast page loads. One thing that we did, and I don't want to get commercial here at Blubrry, but when we started offering WordPress hosting, I told my CIO, I said, the number 1 thing that we have to do with these websites is to make sure they have fast page loads. We want them to score very high in the Google tool that is used to measure page speed loads. And they take the mobile page speed load high. They score that higher than they do a browser page load. So we worked really hard to make sure that those pages were really fast. We cached, we did a whole bunch of stuff to make sure that they were lightning fast, so that the individual that was on our lowest hosting plan that had a free website would have the same performance as someone that was using a $90 or $100 a month web host to be able to have fast page speeds. I personally run my website on my own server with GoDaddy and a variety of other services. And it was important for me to make sure my pages load fast too. And I did a check yesterday. And my primary there's two scores there, 79 and 98. The 79 is the mobile score. It's about 11 points lower than it should be. So I'm not even perfect. But the desktop score is 98. If I was to raise the mobile, and we'll go back and we'll have someone look at it and figure out why the mobile isn't loading as fast and make some optimizations, we'll get that up in the 90s. What will end up happening is that we will ultimately rank even higher, because Google will say, okay, this page loads fast. We're not wasting people's time. Page speed insight tools from Google to see where your page speeds are if you are on your own site, or if you're hosting your show on, yourhostingprovider.com/some name. You need to look at that page speed, because some of them, it's horrible, in like the 40s, and you automatically get downdriven in search results. And remember, again, Google is the #1 discovery pathway for podcasts right now. So page speed loads are super, super important. And as well, you should do a checkup on your feed once in a while. And I'll promote Cast Feed Validator. It's a free tool. You can go over there and drop your feed in and just make sure that your feed is valid. I don't do it on my show. I don't do it every episode. I'll check every 3 or 4. If someone says, hey, I don't see an episode over on such and such app, I'll do a cross check, because that's really what it's all about. So I just wanted to spend the first bit of this presentation today kind of talking about these items. And I guess what I'd want to do now, Jared, is open this up for questions, if there are any.
We do have some questions. Let's see. I have a question here from Lisa, and she was asking, do you provide pre-written social media posts to your podcast guests so they can more easily promote and link to their episode?
I don't personally do that, but I think that's a great idea. I really do. It's a lot easier to provide them something pre-written that they don't really have to think about it. If they love the interview, they should just, most people will probably just slap it in there and go. But again, a social mention is not as valuable as a mention on their personal website that links back to you. That's permanent. Social is fleeting. Google will give you points for that, but not all stuff is indexed. Google cannot index the inside of Facebook. They can index Twitter. They can index public posts on Instagram. But again, it's a limited impact. So I always try to push for the link back on their personal blog, because it's there forever if you get lucky.
Okay, we got another question here from Jason. He said, in a world with thousands of podcasts in existence, new ones added every day, is it better to have the most unique show content or the best marketing promotion to attract listeners? Both?
It's kind of interesting. When I was in the Navy, sustained superior performance got me promoted very high as an enlisted person. I feel the same way about content. Sustained superior content gets you a bigger audience. I've been at this a long time. When I start screwing up, when I have a couple of bad shows on my personal show, and believe me, everyone does. We have some that are kind of like, ugh, right? I see a drop. I see a drop off in the audience. So for me, it's when you see a 4 or 5,000 download difference between an episode and an episode, and maybe some of you are not at that point yet, but you'll see this noticeable difference. Sustained superior content is the best. Now, as equally important is you need to be doing what I've talked about on your blog, working on the social stuff. You need to be reaching out to local media. Whenever I have an anniversary of my show, when I hit a 100 mark, I just crossed over 1,500 here in Michigan. I reached out to some local news groups. They came down, they did some video in the studio, and they did a 2-minute spot on me on TV. I go to events, I promote at events, I talk with people in my content sphere, which is open doors and doing live events and being able to interview people. It's really a full-blown effort. I call it the grind. You have to grind. Just doing, okay, if you're having fun and you just want to have a fun show, you get together with your friend, your partner, a girlfriend, you have a glass of wine. Well, if you're just doing this show to like talk and you're not worried about building a big show, then have fun. There's no rules in podcasting. You don't have to do any of this. But if your goal is to build, the way I looked at it in the early days is I did in my regular 8 hours at work, and I came home and I grinded a couple of hours each evening promoting the show and doing it in a way like hanging out in a group. And if it was a tech group and someone would make a mention of something, and if I had happened to talk about that particular topic, I would say, hey, by the way, I do a podcast on episode 186 at the 15-minute mark. I talked about this exact topic. Sure, that's just a nugget, right? That's a one. That's a new listener that's going to come in and subscribe. And if you continue that work over time, this is not easy. And if you're a celebrity, and here's another thing: celebrity doesn't guarantee success in podcasting. Again, sustained superior content where you don't waste the listener's time is really, really important. And I'll back up for a second. My show really breaks a lot of rules. I spend the first 10 minutes not talking about content. I talk to but this is the way I've designed my show. I talk to my family of listeners, and I consider them part of my family. So my first part of the show is what I've been doing, what's been going on for the last 3-4 days, issues, life, and then intermixed with the sponsor spot, intermixed with where you can find me socially, So oftentimes I get new listeners that are kind of confused about the show because we don't get right into the content. But that's the way I designed my show because I decided to build it that way. And maybe I've suffered over time some audience growth, but that's how we've done it. Go ahead.
Question from Lavelle. He said, should every podcaster have a website? I know you've touched on this, but he might have
absolutely
joined late. Okay.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
So everybody should have their own website. Carolyn says, I don't know how to embed a player on my website. Could someone at Blubrry help me? So who could she reach out to for that?
Just go over to blubrry.com, and on the bottom of the page, there's a support link. And if you're publishing on Blubrry in our publisher, we provide an embed, just like a YouTube embed that you can put on your website. If you're using WordPress and PowerPress, it should show up automatically, but Mike and the team will be happy to get you on the phone and talk about it. Or support at blubrry.com if you just want to email as well.
Michael says, if I want people to come to my website, do I really want a follow option on the website? Why would they then come back to the website then to listen?
Again, your listeners that are already listening to your show, they're probably not going to come to your website. They're already bought in. They're already following. They're already listening. Mm-hmm. The people that you want to tell about your website is the person that's just happening in for the first time. Say, hey, by the way, there's a website. I call, it's stupid. I'm a geek. I call geeknewscentral.com Moonbase Alpha. That's where I live. That's where the brand is built and grown. I want them to listen everywhere. So we give them the option to listen everywhere. But the goal is, and it's also part of a methodology that let's say I was ever deplatformed or something like that because I said something stupid, they will know they can come to Geek News Central and get the show and build a brand there and make the connections. And, I just today, doing a podcast over amount of time opens all kinds of doors. I become a movie reviewer. I'm on some new list, and I just did a 2-hour review of a new sci-fi film that's coming out called Voyager from Lionsgate. I can't say too much about it because I'm still under embargo, but it's those types of relationships that you get that allow you to give content into your podcast that you may not access otherwise by not having a website. Because the movie reviewer company came to our website and said, hey, we love your website. We love what you're doing. We love what you're talking about. Can you do this for us? And for me, it's kind of a fun opportunity to get access to stuff early. But at the same time, I get new content for my podcast that I can talk about that will keep the people listening, and maybe coming to the website to read the movie review.
Paul says, do you use programs like Buffer for social media promotion?
I use, so for the company, we think it's very important. We use a product called From Meltwater. It's very expensive, but it is for companies. It's a commercial program that tracks what people are saying about you. The program that I use the most is Hootsuite to do, multiple posts across different stuff, schedule, social promotion. There's lots of great tools. And I think that we're all going to become short of time again as the pandemic releases us back into baseball games and, recitals and concerts and that kind of stuff. So I think anything you can do now to streamline your social promotion strategy and having stuff scheduled to go out a certain amount of times a day and so forth and different topics. I write a social calendar. I sit down at like almost near the end of the month and I write my social calendar. I don't know what my show topics exactly are going to be because I do a show that's based on current events. So that kind of will develop over time, but it's really about the social promotion part.
Lilo wants to know, where do you go to find the upload speed of your website?
You can do a Google search for Google Page Speed Insights, and that'll take you to their page. You can paste in your URL to your website and click Analyze. And when you get done, it's going to give you 2 results. It's going to give you your mobile results, and it's going to give you your desktop results. And you'll be able, it actually gives you indications of maybe what's going wrong, where a problem may lay. So, just fair warning. It can become a little obsessive in trying to keep the speeds up. And a lot of things can affect it. Here's one small tip. Okay, let's say you're going to put an image in the top right-hand corner or top left-hand corner of your blog post. If that image only needs to be 150 pixels by 150 pixels, make sure that the picture you upload or the image you upload is only 150 pixels by 150 pixels. Because if you upload a 1080 image, then your web software is going to scrunch that down and still serve the full size of that media file. And you're delivering a whole bunch of data that you don't need to, which causes your page speed to go down. So you want to be careful on image sizes. Use compressed JPEG. Don't use PNG. Matter of fact, I use a plugin on my WordPress site called Smush, SMUSH. It'll take the file that I've uploaded and actually smash it again to get that image size down so it doesn't affect. Again, it's all about that first 2 seconds of that page load. That's what Google really looks at to make sure you're delivering a good experience to people.
Lisa wants to know, can you include your podcast on a website already created for your business, or should it have its own site?
If your podcast is directly related with your business, it needs to be on the business website. You don't want to, because if you have a business on gardening and you're doing a podcast on business management, they need their own websites. But if you're doing a gardening show if you have a gardening website and you have a gardening podcast, the podcast needs to be right there co-located. And especially if it's feeding your business, the last thing you want is brand. You don't want the brand to be split. And what often will happen sad to say, and this is something we have done at Blubrry, is because we run a directory. We've got 1.5 million podcasts listed in there. The last thing we've ever wanted was the Blubrry listing to be higher than any of our podcasters' listings on their website. So we actually have suppressed Google search on the Blubrry directory so that if someone types in a show name, it doesn't show up as Blubrry first. It shows up as their .com or if they're on a blubrry.net site, so that their pages are found first. And the challenge will happen is let's say you have a site over on, say you have an Anchor account and you've got a show over on Anchor, but you also have your own .com somewhere. I would not, I'd be very careful about the metadata that I put on Anchor and also put on my personal website, because then it can become a conflict. Google said, who's the authority? Who has the authority for this show? So you always want your primary Moonbase Alpha, as I'm calling it, or your main point of presence, your main brand, to get the authority that Google does. So I always tell people, if you're going to have a main website, make sure the show notes are very extensive there and very minimal on wherever you get your RSS feed. That's, in my opinion, one of the big issues podcasters have by being on a locked-in platform. And I'm not saying these platforms are bad. I'm just saying they come with different SEO challenges for having your show is always going to be found. Doesn't matter where you're at. Doesn't matter if you're on Anchor, Podbean, Libsyn, or wherever. The title of your show is going to be lead to your show page, probably on those services, no problem. It's the episode data, again, that I'm talking about. This getting in deeper in the weeds is, if you can search your latest episode titles and you come up on the first page of Google, you're doing the right thing. If you're not found, you're not winning the Google game. So.
All right, Todd, there's a question about YouTube. Do you recommend people also put their audio on YouTube?
Well, Jared, I've been doing live for more than 10 years, and I do all my shows on YouTube in video. So if you have the option, and by the way, if you decide ever to do video or do live, and live's fun because it gives you a little interactivity. If you ever decide to do video, it makes you a much better podcaster, because you have to be prepared, and you can't edit video as easy as you can audio. So you have to, it makes you be a better podcaster by doing live and maybe streaming to YouTube live. I know a lot of people that swear by putting their shows up on YouTube. It can't hurt. It just can't hurt, because again, on YouTube, you're not going to have as much rich show notes. You're going to have a title, and maybe make that title a little bit different than what's on your website. You're going to have your episode number, maybe. You're going to have a little description. There's not going to be the same type of metadata you're going to find on your blog. But I think YouTube is always a viable place to go. And again, I'm not a YouTube expert. The most, I think maybe my YouTube videos get maybe the max of 100 listens or watches, views. And probably 20 of those come from the live session. But on the other hand, my audio podcast, and I publish my show as a video podcast as well, is a 70-30 split. And right now, my main show, Geek News Central, has about 150,000 subscribers. So 70% of those listen, 30% of them watch. Why they watch me, I don't know. The new media show that I do with Rob Greenlee from Libsyn, that audience is about 80-20, about 80% listen and 20% watch on that video podcast as well. But then again, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube Live, Facebook Live, we might garner all collectively 200-300 views of that content. But again, the new media show has about 15,000 subscribers. So it really, really depends on what you want to do. I personally don't have as much value. I watch a lot of YouTube series. I have watched a lot more since the pandemic, but I think that the key for me is merely the visuals. And this is another thing too. Audiences will forgive you for bad video, but they won't forgive you for bad audio. So audio always has to be spot on no matter what. So if you put up a YouTube video as audio only, that's fine. And again, I don't care where they listen or watch as long as they do. So I make it available everywhere. I think it's a good strategy. But I always, again, at the very beginning of my show, my intro includes my website address so that they know where they can come, because we do other content on the website, not just podcasting. So like Liz, she's doing part of her biz, so she's probably doing blog posts with her biz and intermixing with the podcast. That is a winning combination from a Google perspective.
Kendall wants to know, is it still important to seek out reviews?
Okay, so the jury's out. I haven't asked for a review in more than 10 years. I don't think people really read. Maybe people read reviews if they find you in the App Store and they want to see about the show. But I haven't asked for, again, I'm probably the wrong person to ask on that particular question. It doesn't hurt to get reviews, but I ask my audience to link back to my show. So yeah. I tell them, hey, mention the show on your Facebook page, mention the show on Twitter, mention my sponsor page. I have them linked to my sponsor page more than I have them linked to my website. And I'm going to tell you what, that's one of my strategies in having the same sponsor for 15 years is my audience links to my sponsor page, which makes it very popular on Google, which drives non-podcast listeners to that sponsor page. Sometimes they use the promo codes. My sponsor knows that. All they care about is performance. They don't care how I get it to them, through the podcast or through the website. So I always ask the listeners to link back because, again, it's backlinking. That backlinking to the website is so important.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah,
I think that's contrarian too, Todd. I think that for some advice out there.
Again, don't take my advice on
reviews.
Some do, and again, here's the best thing about podcasting: there are no rules, and no advice is necessarily bad. It's just I just don't ask for reviews. So maybe that's Todd. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. If you're a new podcaster, probably you'd say, hey, if you love the show, drop me a review, but don't become annoying. I would rather ask yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
I think
you were saying?
I think there's a balance there, Jared. I really do from from that standpoint. So, and nothing hurts. And matter of fact, some of the best publicity that I have used on my show is bad publicity. I used to have a guy in Brooklyn, New York. His name was Sal. He would kill me every week and talk about, what you said on that particular part of your show was stupid. You were wrong. I read every one of those emails on the show because what it did is it made my P1s, my fans, come to my defense, and it built the community, and I embraced the haters. So I wish Sal still listened to my show. He doesn't listen to me. He finally got tired of me and left. But Sal was great entertainment. It was sport. So, have fun with your podcast too.
He did. He didn't want to deal with your P1s.
Right.
Leila has another question. Said, in this virtual COVID world, is there another way to have a guest without using Zoom? So this isn't really growth, but it's just talking more about guest options.
I just spent 20 plus days on vacation in the Dominican Republic. I recorded the show remotely. Yes, I traveled. I took a COVID test to come home, wore a mask. Everything was safe. Everything was good. But I used Riverside.fm. And it's a great platform for doing. It is a paid platform, but I don't think there's between it and there's one other, and it's slipping my mind here.
Squadcast maybe, or
there's one other.
Let me think.
They've been in the news lately, but there's a couple out there, and I like Riverside.fm because what they do is a double ender. They record locally on my side and they record locally on the other side. And when you get done, everything is uploaded to Riverside, those master WAV files, and then you download both of them and you drop them into your editing software, and you have two perfectly synced master audio tracks that really work good. Now they will record video too if you want to do the video portion of the recording. I don't think they do live. Some people are using StreamYard to do live and do recordings that way with video. But from your audio recordings, always have a master backup. Just don't count on the digital recording.
Todd, what is your setup for live streaming and recording your podcasts?
If I had it to do all over again, Jared, I would not do it this way. Because when I started streaming, it was a whole different ball game, and the hardware's out there. So I use a TriCaster TC1. It retails for an extremely a large amount of money, almost a car type of money. So there's lots of tools out there today that you can live stream with on Wirecast is a good solution. OCR, I think, is one. There's a whole, and they're free. Well, Wirecast isn't free. I think they have a trial version you can use, but there's some great streaming software applications out there. If you want to do, this studio has 1, 2, 3. It's got lots of options. So I can switch through and do most podcasters, and in 9 out of 10 times I'm running on camera number 2 in my studio. So right. You don't have to have this fancy setup. I think investing in a good camera is as much as anything when you do the live streaming. And again, there's lots of services out there. I use Wowza to restream. There's another company actually called Restream that will restream to multiple locations. So there's lots of options where you don't have to break the bank. I broke Fort Knox building this thing, but I really, it's if the amount of money I spend here is insane. And does it look that much different than someone using a webcam? Nope. Does it sound much different than someone using the ATR 2100? Nope. So yeah, I can do lower thirds. I can do little fly-ins and fly-outs. I can do little cool things like that. But there's free software out there that will do exactly what I just did with this expensive TC1.
Okay, Jen, she has a comedy podcast, and she's saying she's finding the comedy niche to be tough to crack, and was wondering, other than being more funnier or being funnier, if you had any advice.
Comedy is, matter of fact, is kind of incidental. I had a guy come in. I run this as a commercial studio too, but I only take certain clients. I had a guy that came in here today that wants to cut a 15-minute demo video for his submission to some comedy festivals. And him and I were talking about this exact thing. And I said, listen, he said, I'm thinking about doing a podcast. I said, well, that's a great idea. I said, but number one, you should have a couple of funny guests. It's hard to do solo. People have had huge success building their brand and getting exposure. But I think you can't do a solo show as a comedian. I think you have to have 2, 3, 4 comedians together to do a good comedy show, so you can riff off one another and maybe have a guest where you can riff off the guest from time to time, or bust on them, or have whatever you comedians do. I think that is a pretty successful formula. But again, it really goes back to the grind. There's probably, I don't know, I'd have to look in my comedy category, but there's probably 20,000 podcasts in the comedy category. So again, it has to be good. You need to plan it. You need to kind of, do like you, just before you go to improv, make sure you have your joke list down, and how you're going to have it in your mind, how that's going to work out from how you're going to play on each other. And if you have a good team, you'll play on each other naturally, and you won't need to write something. But I think it's an absolute wonderful way for comedians to get exposure. But again, it's just like trying to get into comedy clubs. You gotta grind. You got to do the same thing. You got to promote on social. You got to do, you got to be Instagram. You got to be everywhere.
Todd, we see a lot of shiny object syndrome. A few years ago, people was like, "Oh, you got to be on Snapchat," and then now you got to be on Clubhouse. And what do you say to people that make those kind of comments?
Clubhouse is an interesting platform, and I'm excited. We've been integrating with the new media show. Had a few technical issues. We've done live like this. We're really not live, but we're kind of live, and we've integrated Clubhouse in. I think that Clubhouse is going to be tricky because there's not a lot of, okay, so when you call a radio station, you want to talk to the DJ. What do you want to talk about? There's a screener. And the screener gets rid of the wackos and brings on people that have something good to say. And even sometimes them are beeped up and hanged up on. So the challenge with Clubhouse is unless you know who you're bringing onto the stage and you're trying to stay within a topic frame. So Rob and I tried to do a topic frame on a specific show, but what ended up happening is we invited people up on stage on Clubhouse, and what it handed was people were asking us questions that were not related to what we wanted to talk about that day, and it kind of took the show off the rails. So you've got to find a way to have a happy medium with that. If you're going to do something on Clubhouse live and record, maybe you pick 5, 6 people that are going to come up on stage and have commentary, and you can have a controlled environment. Whereas maybe sometimes you just tell your audience in advance, this is going to be freestyle and we're going to see what happens. But you have a high risk of alienating your primary podcast audience. You can't forget about them. They're listening. They're not interacting. You're talking to them. Don't talk around them. Make sure you're always talking to them. That's the challenge of doing video. Is sometimes I'll put something up on the screen and I'll forget to tell the audio audience what I'm talking about. And I'll get an email say, hey, thanks for, call me a dirty word and say, we have no idea what you're talking about because we couldn't see it. So it's the same kind of model. And after show, maybe it's an after show place to hang out. Maybe it's someplace you and your guests go after the show, but it's a huge time commitment. I think it's great for education, as long as you trust the people that are discussing things there. And I think you have to be real careful about that. Because, we're talking today about having your own website. Today, or not today, the first time I was on Clubhouse, the first room I went into, some guy emphatically told a podcaster, you do not need a website. All you need is your anchor landing page to build your podcast. And I was kind of like, great advice. Wrong advice, in my opinion. But again, there's no rules in podcasting. So was he technically wrong? No. But it was his opinion. But who was he? And it was somebody I'd never heard of. Went and looked at their show. Didn't have any comments. Didn't have any following. His social, like 80 followers on Twitter. And I'm like, this guy was giving an expert opinion. Was he really an expert? What we find in the podcasting space, and I'm not saying I'm an expert because I'm an old dog and I try to learn new tricks every day. But one thing that I do know is that there's this trend in podcasting. Someone starts a podcast, they get 6, 7 episodes in. Oh, I'm an expert. I'm not having success building my own show. So now I'm going to become a consultant and teach other podcasters to podcast. So take advice from podcasters that have built successful podcasts and take that other advice and strain it through several layers of strained paper.
No, that's good. I totally agree. There are some people that want to see your sponsor page. Can you share that?
Yeah. So again, I think it's backwards. Let me bring that up. And actually, I'm going to tell everyone I did this in a podcast movement presentation before. Let me switch here. Got to click another button or two. File, Chrome, Google Chrome. This page is a $3 million page. And I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying to tell you this is the value of this page and what it's driven to me over the last 15 years. It's very simple. Talks about GoDaddy promo codes, the month, non-expiring, has a little introduction, has the coupon codes in the clicker. Talks just, it's a blog post with lots of information, what you're doing, how you can go to geeknewscentral.com/GoDaddy and look at it. This is a secret weapon, ladies and gentlemen. And this is replicatable on other products and services. Now, over 15 years, I've had over 100,000 people linked to this page. So I have lots of inbound traffic to that page that is not podcast listeners. But again, if you're on quota, and the deal I have with GoDaddy is I have to bring them X number of new customers every month. And then after that X number, if I meet that number, and once I get over that, then I get a bonus. So they don't care how it gets there, as long as we get there. And the podcast is a means to drive traffic to that website, because you can't have a sponsor for 15 years and expect your audience to buy the same product, every month. So this is where the strategy of having new people come in the front door as people are going out the back door has worked I have enough people starting as a new listener of the show and using the promo codes each month that it keeps the sponsorship alive. They can cancel. I've had a few months where we were under quota and we had serious discussions and I was under the gun. So nothing is ever guaranteed with a sponsorship. You have to deliver for them to send me a check. But this page, and this was actually suggested by the sponsor to create this page. I would have never done it on my own because I didn't think about it. That has allowed me over really the last 15 years of them being a sponsor here to earn about $3 million through this sponsorship. So that gives you an idea. Now, the numbers can be low and high. Some months it's 4 figures, some months it's 5 figures. Again, it all depends on how well I do promoting and driving traffic to that page and having people use those promo codes. So that's a great thing to do if you have a sponsor. And and if you're doing an affiliate deal where there's no risk, you could create a couple of these on your website.
Wow. And people are confirming. So GoDaddy is the sponsor for the podcast.
GoDaddy is the sponsor of my Geek News Central podcast, the primary podcast I've done since October of 2004. That dates me a ways.
It's all good. Todd, we're starting to wind down here. Do you have anything that you want to share and parting thoughts? And definitely want to mention where people can check out Blubrry.
Yeah, just come over to blubrry.com, get a free trial while you're over there. Check us out. Love to have you. Again, we kind of call our method the Blubrry way. It's really all the stuff I've been talking about today, really on your own website. We provide the services and literally, be frank, get the hell out of the way. We'll let you build your brand. And we're going through a complete UI UX update. So some of our oldness is going away. So little by little, you're going to see major improvements to our UI. We'll have lots of more announcements about that in the future. But if you have comments or want to ask questions to me, Todd@blubrry.com is my email address. Our social account is @Blubrry, and it's without the E's. And people always ask, why is Blubrry without the E's? Well, we couldn't afford the E's, so that's why we could only afford one vowel. And it's actually true. To buy the 2 additional E's was $250,000 at the time. So
you don't need the E's.
We don't need the E's at all. But
that's fun.
Yeah. So Jared, Todd, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, we appreciate your time. Glad you got a chance to take some vacation down in the Dominican, and look forward to hopefully seeing you in Nashville. And certainly appreciate your insights here today. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. And everyone, appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to be with Jared and I.
Okay, have a great evening, everyone. And we have another session tomorrow, but you can see that in the university and in our other pages where we list everything. And if you don't mind, shoot Todd a quick email, Todd@blubrry.com, and say thanks. And Todd, we're grateful. Thank you again.
All right, take care. Thank you so much.